everybody. Episode 25 of the podcast. It is Swimming America, the Untitled Sports Podcast. It is Monday, January 22nd, 2024. People, I hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody is having a great day. And when I tell you, we got ourselves a loaded episode of the Torres pod here on a Monday. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Are we jam-packed? Here's what you need to know about today's show. We'll open. Don't always do a ton of NFL, but today we have to react to the wild finish late Sunday. It's all anybody's talking about here on a Monday morning. I am, of course, talking about Buffalo falling again to the Kansas City Chiefs. Let me just say this. I'm over a lot of things in life. I don't think I'm more over anything more than the Buffalo Bills. I'll explain. We'll talk a little bit about that. From there, we'll take a quick break. It was a weirdly busy weekend in college football. Ohio State, I'll tell you what, Ryan Day is gearing the you-know-what up for 2024. Two more major portal additions. Florida football just got popped with sanctions, and Arizona football gets back all their marquee players after Jedd Fisch leaves. Finally, we're going to spend about the last 25 to 30 minutes on college hoops because there is so much to talk about, including the unbelievable debut of Big Z, Zvonimir Ivisic. We talked about him on Friday. Kentucky gets the win. They get their 7'2" Croatian dreamboat back in the lineup. We'll talk about the rest of a busy weekend of college football as well. College hoops as well, excuse me. So we're going to go from NFL to college football to college basketball. Nobody else can do it quite like Torres. And so with that said, let's not waste any more time and let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, listen, I'm a college football, college basketball guy, but I, like all of you, was glued to the TV all weekend long, not only watching college hoops, not only monitoring the college football portal and everything going on there, but also the 4 NFL playoff games, and most specifically, that late afternoon Sunday Chiefs-Bills game, part like 97. It feels like they play every other week, okay? And so I was riveted. I was excited. And as I record here, it is all anybody is going to be talking about here on a Monday. So we're going to talk about it for a few minutes. But if you're watching on YouTube, I'm rubbing my temples because when I think about this game, what I think is very straightforward. This was part 227 or whatever it is of the Bills and Chiefs. It felt like every other one. As the Bills, you thought they were going to win it. You thought they were in position. You thought this was finally the year. And instead, they snatched defeat out of the jaws of victory. And Kansas City, a couple weeks after we left them for dead, this is the worst team of the Patrick Mahomes era. They are going to a 6th straight AFC Championship game, which is absolutely insane. And so I just want to spend a minute or two talking about this game. And listen, I'm not going to do, I always say this, but I'm not going to do the whole, well, in the second quarter, this happened, and in the fourth quarter, this happened. Now, listen, I could talk about all the weird stuff that happened. I could talk about early in the game, the Bills looking like this was finally their time. They're at home. They finally get KC in Orchard Park in the postseason. We could talk about after half, how all of a sudden that offense that couldn't stop moving the football in the first half completely disappeared. We could talk about the weird fake punt. We could talk about how the Bills got lucky to get the ball back because obviously the touchback with Kansas City on the goal line. We could even talk about the final drive where they do convert a couple 4th downs. Then Josh Allen misses a wide open receiver. Then the poor kicker misses wide right. And Scott Norwood, of all people, is trending on Twitter. By the way, if you're under the age of 25 or 30, Google Scott Norwood. It won't be pretty. Super Bowl of years past, okay? But at the bottom line is, listen, I'm not going to talk about all that. I'm not going to get into this player, this or that. Instead, I'm just going to say what's exactly on my mind at this exact moment. The Buffalo Bills have officially become the Ryan Day of the NFL, okay? And we're going to talk about Ryan Day because I'm actually going to say nice things. But what do I always say about Ryan Day? Don't show me wins against Indiana and Michigan State. Do it when it matters against the big boys, and Ryan Day doesn't. Same with Purdue basketball. I don't care about you beating Rutgers and whoever in the regular season, winning the tournament. Well, guess what? This is another year, another wasted opportunity with the Bills, and I'm just over it. I'm just tired of it, okay? And let me even take it a step further with the Buffalo Bills. I have been watching sports for darn near 30 years now, okay? Been watching, consuming, loving it. The same thing I do now, which is watch everything, is what I was doing when I was a kid. This is all I've ever known. Only thing that I think I'm even remotely good at, okay? But I bring it up because when I think about the Bills, something really strikes me. That game in the divisional round 2 years ago, when they were up by the up against the Chiefs with 13 seconds to go, and they could not close out the victory. They lose that game, and I am here to say this. I don't think any team in any sport that I have ever watched over 30 years has gotten more credit for a close loss than the Buffalo Bills did for the Kansas City Chiefs 2 years ago. Because ever since then, we've been trying to put them on a tier with all these super duper elite teams. If you remember that year that they lost to the Kansas City Chiefs in that game, 13 seconds left to go. They were up by 3. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes gets them in field goal range, kick the field goal, tie the game, win in overtime. I bring it up because the following season, the Buffalo Bills, excuse me, who only played in the divisional round, they didn't even play in the Super Bowl. They came in as the Super Bowl favorites the following year. I'm going to have to get some water. Excuse me, okay? Forgive me, okay? Sorry, a little tickle in my throat here. But so Buffalo ends up again. Buffalo ends up losing to Kansas City on the last second. Last year, they come into the season as the Super Bowl favorite. After not winning the Super Bowl, not making the Super Bowl, not even making the AFC Championship game. They end up losing, obviously, to Cincinnati. And then, of course, this past season, again, they were considered a favorite. They struggled the first half of the year. They were awful. They were great out of the bye, but they came up short today. And so when I look at the Buffalo Bills, I'm just amazed that we keep putting them in this category with the Kansas City Chiefs, certainly. But even listen, the San Francisco 49ers have now made, 3 of the last 4 NFC Championship games? Baltimore Ravens, NFC Championship game. The Cincinnati Bengals, back-to-back NFC Championship games and a Super Bowl. You understand that in this entire Josh Allen, Sean McDermott era that we're in right now, that every year, it's a definition of insanity. Over and over, we expect to see the same things, expect different results. You know that this team, how about this? They have never been to a Super Bowl in this era with McDermott and Josh Allen. They've never won a Super Bowl. They have never made a Super Bowl. They made one AFC Championship game, which was during the COVID year. They end up getting destroyed by KC in that season. They have made it now to the divisional round 3 straight years. Remember last year, they easily could have lost to Skylar Thompson and the Miami Dolphins before they lost to Cincinnati at home. This is the 2nd straight year they lose at home they lose at home in the divisional round. 3rd time in 4 years that they've lost to the Chiefs. Stop telling me they're a contender. They're not. I am just completely over them, and I am completely over this era. And it's one of those weird things that I don't have an answer to, okay? And I bring it up because I think about this whole situation. Listen, last week, I came on the show after the Cowboys game, and I said, you got to fire Mike McCarthy. Now, that didn't happen, but I don't want to be the guy that says you got to fire everybody. But I don't know what you do if you're the Buffalo Bills. Because Sean McDermott obviously elevated you to a level that you weren't at for the previous 25 years after the Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas era of the early 90s, okay? So Sean McDermott comes in. They were in the playoffs in 18, 20, 21, 22, 23, so 5 of the last 6 years. But it's not getting over the hump. I don't know how you could bring this guy back. And here's the other part. I was watching that game. Josh Allen, this guy just takes a freaking beating every time this guy plays. This guy is 27 years old. He will be 28 in May. And what I was thinking watching this, like, how many good years do you have left of Josh Allen? He gets killed out there every game. Did you see the play on that last drive where they easily could have called a late hit? When he's running for the first down, he gets the first down and like 5 guys sandwich him. He falls on his throwing shoulder and just gets up and everything's fine. And so I'm not, listen, I'm certainly not Mr. Fire everybody. I don't know what the Buffalo Bills are going to do. And maybe they'll stick with him the way the Cowboys stuck with Mike McCarthy, the way the Eagles stuck with Nick Sirianni. But I just bring it up because how many more years of this Josh Allen era do you have? He's going to be 28. His body's got to feel like it's about 32, 33 right now. Imagine another year of doing exactly what they did. So I feel really bad for Buffalo Bills fans. I don't really feel bad for the team. I'm just tired of believing in you. It's Ryan Day against Michigan. I'm done believing. Just prove it. Just go do it. I don't care. I don't care about this. I don't care about that. And again, we'll talk about Ryan Day here in like 5 minutes. But congrats to the Kansas City Chiefs. Listen, I don't have any amazing Chiefs take. I still don't think this team is as good as they've been, but you got to give them credit. Like they went on the road. What was the big talk? First time they've ever played on the road in the playoffs, and they get the win. They're an underdog against Baltimore in the DraftKings Sportsbook. I can look it up really quick. It appears as though I do believe we have a point spread out for Kansas City, Baltimore point spread. Let's see if we can get that out right now, because I believe we already have an opening point spread per the DraftKings Sportsbook. We sure do. Baltimore is, as I'm recording here, this is really bad. Let's take a look. The Ravens are a 3.5 point favorite. We'll see if that moves over the course of the next couple of days. But I got to give the Chiefs credit. Listen, this isn't the day to do the Mahomes is the greatest thing, because I don't even think he played that well. But they played well enough. His other guys stepped up, although you'd like to see McCole Hardman not fumble on the 1-yard line. But I don't really know what else there is to say about this game. Congrats to the Kansas City Chiefs. You survive, you advance. It's all of the things that we always say. Listen, you got to knock them down. You got to beat them while they're down, whatever. Congrats to them getting the win. And I'll say this, I'm excited about the 2 games next week. I don't have any amazing takeaways from the other 3 games. Super happy for the Detroit Lions. Super happy for the San Francisco 49ers. I'm a Brock Purdy guy. It was pretty cool. We were hosting Fox Sports Radio on Saturday night. Trent Williams, obviously the iconic left tackle for the San Francisco 49ers, came on our show afterwards. We talked to him. You could tell there was a sense of relief from the San Francisco 49ers. They find a way to win. I give Brock Purdy credit. He wasn't great all game, but he made the throws when he had to on that final drive. They get the win there. And obviously Lamar is awesome. The Ravens are awesome. I think the Ravens might be the best team in this league. I don't think that's like an amazing take, considering they were the number 1 seed in the AFC and they destroyed the San Francisco 49ers, like less than a month ago on Christmas Day. So that's Torres on the NFL. I had to get some thoughts out on the freaking Buffalo Bills. I feel bad for you Bills fans. I really do. It's not about you. It's about your team. I don't know how much more heartbreak you could take. All right, so we're going to take a quick break. Come back. We're going to talk a lot of college football. Ohio State, they're gearing up. Unbelievable weekend for them. Florida football hit with sanctions. We'll talk about that. And also, we'll get to some college hoops on the back end of the show. Again, final about 25 minutes or so, we'll hit on Big Z's Zvonimir Ivisic from Kentucky, having an unbelievable debut. Duke loses. A Pitt player jumps on the table. Kansas loses again. Quick break. College football, followed by college basketball. We'll be right back. All right, everybody. I'm back. Gonna be back. I do want to switch gears. And so here's the deal, right? Obviously, look, it's a fun time of year, a lot of NFL stuff. I get all that, etc. But there is still actually a lot of college football news, really, at least over the last 3 or 4 days since we last did the show on Friday. Now, look, a lot of it is, not all of it, but a lot of it is the fact that, it's still the trickle-down effect of the Nick Saban retirement. Now, it's not all because of Nick Saban, but when the GOAT retires in mid to late January, there are going to be repercussions, ripple effects, etc. And so I think we saw a few of those this weekend. Let's go ahead and dive in, because listen, we don't know what the impact of Nick Saban's, decision to retire is going to be on the field in 2024, 2025, and recruiting and this and that, etc. But what I can tell you is this. Through about 2 weeks since Nick Saban decided to retire, I don't think you could argue there has been any bigger benefactor than the Ohio State Buckeyes. The Ohio State Buckeyes. Because over the weekend, they got not 1, but 2 mega commitments that were part of the Alabama program as of 2 weeks ago. I know you know about it, but we got to dive in because there is a bigger picture conversation here. The first one happened late Friday, and it was both a stunner and not really a stunner. The first one was Caleb Downs, that safety that I told you about last week here on this show. He was, I don't think it's hyperbole to say, maybe the best defensive freshman that Nick Saban ever had, led the team in tackles with 107, something that has never been done in the history of Alabama. In the history of Alabama football, they cannot find on record a true freshman leading the team in tackles. Well, he was awesome. And about last Tuesday or Wednesday, he decided to enter the portal. Why I bring it up is because when he entered the portal, it felt as though Georgia was the favorite. We talked about it last week. Travaris Robinson was the defensive backs coach who recruited Caleb Downs to Alabama. He is now an assistant at Georgia. But as the week went on, I'll be honest, I started to hear a little buzz that maybe Ohio State could sneak in. Well, on Friday night, how about this? Caleb Downs, the 5-star former safety, All-American this year at at Alabama, he commits to Ohio State. Why that's important, why it's relevant, it's obviously huge. Plug and play All-American. We'll talk about him with Ohio State in a second. The thing is, though, he is not the only former Alabama 5-star superstar that has committed to Ohio State in recent days. That was because on Sunday, right as everybody got set for NFL football, Detroit, Tampa Bay, and of course, KC Buffalo, we find out that Julian Sayin, who was the #1 quarterback recruit in this current high school class 2024, he enrolled early at Alabama, went through practices for the bowl game, etc. Well, when Nick Saban decided to retire, he himself entered the portal. Was from Southern California, was believed to be either USC, maybe Ohio State gets in the mix. Well, Ohio State landed him too on Sunday afternoon. And so when you add in the two guys that Ohio State got this weekend from Alabama, with everything else that has happened this offseason, two things I believe are true. One, Ryan Day, a guy I have been critical of, has had an offseason for the ages and needs to be commended for it. Two, I'll be honest, I think Ohio State should be the favorite going into 2024. And again, I say that as a guy that has been critical of Ryan Day over recent weeks and recent years. So let's dive in, and let me start by saying this isn't just about these two kids committing, but I do think they are two big cherries on top of the sundae, okay? So first of all, if people don't follow the day-to-day with Ohio State, here is basically everything that has happened since they lost to Missouri in the Cotton Bowl December 29th. First off, they got the quarterback that they believe they need, the quarterback that they believe is going to elevate the program in the here and now. That is veteran Will Howard. Now, I was a little bit critical of the commitment, but what is indisputable, Will Howard will have so much talent around him that if he is any type of quarterback at all, he is going to thrive, maybe be a Heisman candidate. But on top of Will Howard, should mention, by the way, Ohio State also had the number 3 recruiting class in 2024. So that happened in December. It probably would have been number 2 when you factor in Julian Sayin is now part of that group. But anyway, I'm rambling. Bottom line, since the season ended, since the Cotton Bowl, they go ahead and get Will Howard. On top of that, they went out and got Quinshon Judkins, the running back from Ole Miss, 2,500 yards rushing in his 2 seasons at Ole Miss. I keep saying it. Amazing stat. He is the first running back that in his freshman and sophomore year combined to rush for 2,500 yards. First guy in the SEC to do it since some guy named Herschel Walker, okay? That is pretty darn good. That is awesome. He is now an Ohio State Buckeye. But more importantly, it's not just the guys they're bringing in. It's the guys that they have retained as well. And there is not a single program that convinced, I think, a lot of fringe, maybe late first, early second, third round picks to come back, elevate your stock, win a natty, and be in better position next year in the NFL. We've talked about it. We don't need to go through all of them, but leading rusher Travion Henderson was awesome this year, but also missed about 3.5 games. When he was healthy, he was as good as any running back in college football, but he decides to come back. Emeka Egbuka, second leading receiver, 46 catches. That was down from a year ago when he was basically an All-American. Well, he was hurt, going to come back, try to be wide receiver 1 and be in position to go as in the first round next year. You have a situation where on top of that, on the defensive line, JT Tuimoloau, All-American, good enough to go maybe in the first this year, wants to come back. Jack Sawyer coming back. Donovan Jackson, an offensive lineman, coming back. So you talk about legitimately. I don't think there's any other program in college football that can say this. 6 or 7 guys that could have been drafted that are coming back to Ohio State next year. That is, again, on top of Will Howard as a veteran at quarterback, Quinshon Judkins at running back, and oh, by the way, the best defensive player in the portal in Caleb Downs. Also, I didn't even mention, in that 2024 recruiting class, the number 1 player in America, Jeremiah Smith, a wide receiver. And also, I think it's important to note, Julian Sand, your quarterback of the future. So you have now stacked the recruiting, the quarterback room, where you now have a 5-star NFL caliber guy ready to take over a year from now. And so listen, what I would say about this whole situation is this. I have been critical of Ryan Day. I've said a lot of mean things about him, but one thing I will always do, and if you're an Ohio State fan watching or listening to this, and this is the first time you've ever heard of me, one thing I am not ashamed to do, I take L's all the time. And one thing about me, I am always going to base my current opinion on the information that I have now, and I'm willing to shift off opinions, right? People in the media, so often they get stuck on that opinion. This is how it is. This is this. This is that. No. That's not Torres. If I get something wrong, if I get new information and my previous opinion is dead wrong, I'm going to own it and basically say, look, I thought this, but now I think this. And what I think is Ryan Day has done everything any Ohio State fan could ask of him. By the way, I know I'll get a lot of this too. Well, he hired Bill O'Brien as his offensive coordinator. And listen, here's my thought on that. Bill O'Brien was not great as the offensive coordinator at Alabama over the last couple of years. But at the same time, Bill O'Brien had complete autonomy over that offense. And by the way, when I say not great, they did not live up to potential. Ohio State fans say, oh, they were 5th nationally in this and 3rd. No. They did not live up to their potential. Bryce Young bailed them out of all sorts of stuff. I bring it up, though, to very simply say, Bill O'Brien is your offensive coordinator. I don't really care because Ryan Day is still overseeing him. I wouldn't trust Bill O'Brien without any autonomy at all, but if Ryan Day is overseeing him, I still trust him. And so I bring it up because I got to give Ryan Day credit. Listen, I could sit here and stick with my opinion from the day after the last Michigan game and they stink and no. He has done everything right. And I truly believe he has not only built a national championship contender, I believe he has built what should be the preseason number 1 team in the country going into next year. Now, will they be? That I can't tell you. I don't vote in the AP. I can't tell you who should be number 1, who is number 1, whatever. And my hunch is Georgia will probably be number 1. They return a ton, including Carson Beck. They're in the SEC. We know there's SEC bias. On top of that, they've won a lot of games. And if you want to vote Georgia number 1, that's fine. But what I will also tell you is that Ohio State probably has more front-end veteran talent than anyone in college football. So I would vote them number 1. I believe they are the favorites going in. And I don't know, you can look at it as one of 2 ways. It does put more pressure on Ryan Day, but he's got the squad to back it up. There have been years like this year you watched them. I said, I don't think they're explosive enough offensively. Now, part of it was the quarterback. We've talked about that, but I'm just bringing it up to say there have been years where there has been an expectation of Ohio State that I'm not sure was realistic. Well, next year, I don't want to say it's quite national championship or bust, but it's probably pretty close. We'll see what happens. But I got to give Ryan Day credit, man. He came through in the clutch. He has been unbelievable. Talk about 2024, the year of Ryan Day so far, baby. We'll see what happens in September when the games start, but I got to give him credit where it's due, man. He has been unbelievable. Let's switch gears because you know who has not been unbelievable? Billy Napier at Florida State. Did you see what happened on Friday as Billy Napier and the Florida Gators, we find out, are currently under NCAA investigation for their recruitment of former 5-star, 4-star quarterback Jaden Rashada. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's go ahead and talk about a couple thoughts here. First of all, for people who do not remember the entire Jaden Rashada story, it was a wild one. We talked about it a lot this time last year because it really took center stage really around this time. But for people who do not remember, this was a fringe 4-star, maybe the number 2, number 3 quarterback in all of high school football. And he had a wild recruitment. I remember it vividly because I remember talking about it at the beginning. He was believed to be a Florida lean. Then he committed to Miami. And everybody melted down. Mario Cristobal got the best of this, this and that. And then as we got into September, October, November, he flips his commitment from Miami to Florida. And everybody's like, oh, this is great. Florida got their guy. He wanted to be there all along, whatever. Then he goes down to Orlando for one of the All-American games. He's set to move into the University of Florida. And then you hear he might not be moving in. Then you hear he isn't moving in. Then you hear we don't know what the heck is going on with this kid, what is going on, but he's not going to Florida. Well, as it turns out, he ended up at Arizona State. But it happened after he and his family agreed to an NIL deal with Florida. And Florida, not Florida, I should be clear, it's not the university. It was a collective affiliated with the University of Florida, so I'm not blaming anybody in specific. But he agreed to a deal. The deal did not go the way as planned, and basically they weren't going to pay him what they had promised him. So he backs out. He doesn't go to Florida. I'm sure it was chaos behind the scenes, but I just bring it up because at that moment, we kind of figured, okay, this is the end of the story. Well, then The Athletic they did a great job. This was one of the great investigative pieces of journalism I've seen in a long time. They get the contract details of the Jaden Rashada deal, and he was owed $13 million, or he would have been owed $13 million over his 4 years as a Florida Gator. Well, never got the money. That story comes out, and on Friday, we find out that the NCAA is investigating Florida. And basically, they have egregiously violated whatever you want to call the NCAA's rules on NIL. Now, look, we could talk about it. It's absolute nonsense. We know that every collective is paying kids to play. It's pay for play everywhere, okay? But clearly, the NCAA is trying to eliminate pay for play, which is never going to happen. But this is the most obvious case. We have the reporting, whatever. And so I think there are one of two ways to look at this if you're a Florida fan. Well, first of all, there's 3 ways. The first way is, why are they coming after us? Everybody's doing that. I get that. I'm not going to argue with you, Florida. The second way is, oh my God, Billy Napier, what is wrong with you? Billy Napier, poor Billy Napier can't do anything right, okay? In some ways, I feel bad for this guy. In some ways, he's just completely incompetent. But I bring it up because the guy can't do anything right. Back-to-back disastrous seasons. 6-7 in year 1, 5-7 in year 2. Now, I have largely, at first, I was like everybody else. I blamed Dan Mullen, not enough talent in the building, blah, 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 this and that. But at the same time, this season really kind of changed my tune because a couple things. One, he has had 4 transfer portal cycles to get more talent in that program. They shouldn't be as bad as they are. But more importantly, they keep losing games that they should not be losing in manners they should not be losing them. They lost to Arkansas this year in a game that was Arkansas's only SEC win the entire season. Oh, by the way, Arkansas then went on to get destroyed by Auburn the following week and destroyed by Missouri to end the regular season. Sam Pittman, we didn't think was going to survive at the time. It was Arkansas's only SEC win, their first ever win at the Swamp. There was the game against Kentucky. Ray Davis, I believe it was 280 yards rushing. Is that right? Is that math right? That's a lot of rushing yards. That's getting punked by Kentucky. 606 yards of total offense for Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels basically won the Heisman against Florida's defense. And so it's been one debacle after the other, after the other, after the other with Billy Napier. And Florida fans, I think, ended the season at their wits' end. And then it somehow got worse in December when their recruiting class, which was ranked as high as number 3 in the country, could not stop getting they just took one decommitment after the other. I don't even remember all the names at this point, but Xavier Philosame, the safety commit, flipped to Texas. Wardell Mack, cornerback, flipped to Texas. I think it was Nasir Johnson. Is that the name? Flipped to Georgia. Jamonte Waller flipped to Auburn. They had like 6 or 7 high-profile kids flip right before signing day or on signing day. They lost a couple more. Now, they did keep their 2 most high-profile guys, DJ Lagway, a quarterback, LJ McCray, a defensive lineman. But it's just been one thing after another with this guy. And so now you add on an NCAA investigation to this, not ideal, okay? But at the same time, Let me also do this. If you're a Florida fan that's frustrated, let me go ahead and give you a glasses half full hypothetical. I don't think this is the worst thing that could happen in your program, and let me explain why. It is because if Billy Napier has another bad year, I think he's entering this year on the hot seat. The school won't say it, this won't say it, but I can tell you, I talked to somebody who's close to him over the course of the weekend. Like, everybody knows what's at stake in 2024. And of course, Florida has the toughest schedule in college football. Florida, UCF, and Miami out of conference, plus a loaded conference slate. So I'll bring it up because I don't think it's going to get much better. And he knows what's at stake, but here's the good news. If you're willing to wallow in misery and willing to acknowledge that somebody getting fired sucks for him, but might not be the worst thing for Florida football, I'm here to tell you, point blank, this might not be the worst thing, because here's the thing. Now that the NCAA investigation is open, you can potentially fire Billy Napier for cause. What does that mean? What it means is pretty straightforward. What it means is that if he breaks NCAA rules, if NCAA rules are broken under his watch, whether he knew about them or not, you can fire him and get him out of that contract. Now, I know what people will say. No, you can't. He's going to fight it. This and that. But we've seen it time and time and time again. When you do something dumb, when you get in trouble with the NCAA, Kevin Ollie at my alma mater, UConn. There's been others. Oh, by the way, Mel Tucker, not quite the same, but he had a personal misgiving in his personal life, or whatever you want to call it. Michigan State fired him, like, we're not paying you. You can take us to court and we'll maybe settle, but we're not going to give you all your money. And so if you're Billy Napier, if you're a Florida fan that does not believe in Billy Napier, this might be your proverbial get out of jail free card. Because now, guess what? Now you can fire him and you can say, you want your money, you can take us to court, but we ain't paying you a dime because you violated your contract with this situation by being investigated by the NCAA. So it's something to watch. It's something to consider. It's something to keep an eye on. But I don't think this is the worst thing for Florida fans, because I think this ultimately leads to Billy Napier being fired for cause. I think he might have a new head coach next year. Really quickly, one other thing. Billy Napier, Florida, head coach next year. I think there's a lot of thought that next year, Jedd Fisch, who is now at Washington, would have been the lead candidate for that job. He is a Florida alum, just let Arizona do a 10-win season. I bring it up because last week he left for Washington. We talked about it. We don't need to relitigate the whole situation. Why it's important? It's because on Saturday at the Arizona UCLA basketball game, we had the two stars of the Arizona football team. Noah Fifita, the star quarterback, redshirt freshman, 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 74% completion percentage. And Tetaroa McMillan will be a first-round NFL wide receiver next year. They both announced with their teammates that they are coming back to Arizona. They are running it back, baby. And so, one, this is huge for Arizona. But two, I'll be honest, I do think it's sort of, in my opinion, speaks to what I said on last week's show. Now, I got crushed by everybody that's not an Arizona fan. Oh, Torres, why are you sticking up for Arizona? Jedd Fisch made this move. It's more money, more prestige, better conference, and historically, Washington is a better program than Arizona. I totally agree with all that. I'm not going to argue it. I also think there is a situation where you can buy high, sell low, whatever. And he is coming in at the top of expectations from Washington's perspective. And he had a really good team at Arizona. And so why I'm talking about this is because I'm not in the business of telling people what decisions to make with their lives. You know, take whatever jobs you want, marry who you want. I don't care. Okay. As long as you don't hurt people, hurt animals, do whatever you want. Just treat people with respect. Don't hurt animals. I don't really care what you do. Okay. But I just bring it up because when I look at Jedd Fisch, I do think the circumstances were unique. You can't just look at which job is better. You can't just look at who's going to pay you more money. What you have to look at is the overall landscape. And the overall landscape is he's going to a very tough Washington job coming off of a national championship. And if he had just stayed at Arizona for one more year, he would have had a team that is good enough to compete for a Big 12 title, make the college football playoff, And then he would have gotten even bigger offers from better jobs and better opportunities. I don't blame him for taking that job. But what I do think is, I think his thought process was, I'm going to go there. I'm going to bring all my players. And we're just going to pick up right where we left off and we're going to ball out. And I think what he completely underestimated was the fact that those players are loyal to Arizona. And they were loyal to him until he stabbed them in the back because he sold all this loyalty. He told them all to stay. A lot of these kids had offers to transfer and NIL and opportunities and this and that. And they all said before he decided to leave, we're staying. We believe in what we're doing. And so he leaves. And again, I think he thought he could bring all those guys. They decide to stay. And now Arizona is stacked up for 2024. And I think they are potentially the Big 12 favorites. Now, keep in mind, by the way, Jedd Fisch has gotten a few guys to leave. Jonah Coleman, the leading receiver, is transferring to Washington. Four-star quarterback who was committed is headed to Washington. But I'll just say, I think he underestimated the number of guys and their willingness to stay. One other thought on this, I want to give a quick shout out. I thought this was pretty cool. There is a guy, I had never heard of this guy until this weekend, but I want to give a quick shout out to a guy by the name of Humberto Lopez, okay? So he is one of Arizona's primary boosters. And what I would say is, listen, we all know there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that we're not all aware of. But I bring it up because this guy went on the record and did an interview where he explained how everything went down with Jedd Fisch. He said Jedd Fisch asked for a certain salary. We agreed to it. He shook me and she shook my hand. He looked me in the eye and I thought we were done. And then he stabbed me in the back. And then on top of that, apparently this Humberto Lopez guy did an interview where he said, I told Jedd as soon as he left, you ain't taking our players. I will pay whatever it takes to keep them at Arizona. So it is just a fascinating look at the behind the scenes of how all this stuff really works. For Jedd Fisch, listen, I think he'll be okay. He's going to make tens of millions of dollars over his time at Washington, and maybe he builds something really good. But as I said, I think if he had stuck out one more year, he probably gets the Florida job. He gets more money, more prestigious job, better opportunity to win. Now I think he's probably kind of stuck at Washington, right? Because he's going to, it's going to be hard to buy him out the next year or two. So we'll see what happens. Whatever. Congrats to Arizona, though, man. You lost your coach, but you kept your core. People that were in the building on Saturday at McHale Center when the players announced they were coming back said it was very emotional. It was a cool scene. So congrats to Arizona fans. We'll see what happens there. Brent Brennan, again, as the new head coach, came from San Jose State. We'll see what happens from there. All right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break, come back. When we come back, do want to talk some college hoops. Big Z. What a story that was in Kentucky. Talk about that. We'll talk about Duke losing, Kansas losing, Tennessee's unstoppable, and some interesting other stories from across college basketball. Quick break. All right, everybody. I'm back. Gonna be back. Final segment of the show. So good to be back. Do want to go ahead and wrap with a little bit of college hoops. Not a huge Saturday of mega matchups and all that good stuff in college basketball. But what I can say is there was one story that, in my opinion, was the biggest and one of the, frankly, coolest stories that we saw in college basketball, not only this season, but that we've seen in a long time. And it came from Lexington, Kentucky, in a game where Kentucky beat the brakes off of Georgia. Okay, listen, the final score was not reflective of how dominant Kentucky was in this game. It turned into a ref show late. There was all sorts of whistles. The second half was really marred by the refs. But Kentucky puts up well over 100 points in a win over the Georgia Bulldogs. But it's not just that a top 10 team beat a good conference team at home. It was how it happened and the circumstances around it, and a follow-up from Friday's show, because Saturday was the debut of Zvonimir Ivisic, Big Z, a player that took over college basketball social media on Saturday night. And so I want to break it down. I want to talk about Kentucky. But when I tell you this isn't just a big win, but an important win because an important piece was added to one of the best teams in college basketball, this is big and it's cool. And let's go ahead and dive in. So if you listen to Friday's show, we talked about a kid named Zvonimir Ivisic, a freshman at Kentucky. And I kind of gave you the backstory. I think everybody knows. But listen, this is a kid was a 7'2" player from Croatia. Tested the NBA draft waters last summer. He played overseas, played professionally in Europe, tested the draft waters, came to the US, did the workouts, whatever, and ends up withdrawing from the NBA draft. At that point, everyone just kind of assumes he's going to go back to Europe, whatever, no big deal. And then all of a sudden, like a random Friday afternoon, we start to get word that, oh, this kid, 7'2", really talented, he is being recruited by Kentucky. And then like 2 days later, he commits to Kentucky. So it was a wild recruitment, but Kentucky late in the summer was able to snag a superstar European dynamic prospect. The problem is everything that has happened since, and this is what we talked about on Friday. Took a while for Kentucky to admit him to the school. And then the frustrating part was even after he got admitted, the NCAA really just dragged their feet with his commitment or with his, eligibility, basically, for lack of a better term. And again, we talked about this on Friday, but I was frustrated because I sat there and said, wait a second now. This is a kid that he is playing college basketball in an era where every single transfer is immediately eligible. That isn't hyperbole. That is literal. On top of that, we have European players all over college basketball that are eligible. And the issue seemed to be that he earned money as a professional overseas. Oh, by the way, literally every player of importance is earning money, and a lot of money playing college basketball. So it made no sense. I went on a rant, but to my credit, I said, look, my sense is that we are getting towards the finish line. On Saturday afternoon, Mitch Barnhart, the AD of Kentucky, officially announced that Big Z, Zvonimir Ivisic, was eligible. And I guess we didn't even know at that time, but the assumption is, oh my goodness, we might actually see this kid play on Saturday. And so that's why this is so big, because Big Z made his debut. And when I sit here and say it wasn't just that he made his debut, first of all, the fans were so fired up. I give those Kentucky fans credit. They've had his back from day one, whatever. But then he steps on the court and he looks like a 7'2" skinny Jokic. It was unbelievable. First possession, he's on the floor, block shot. Second or third possession, he catches the ball in the lane, behind the back pass, wide open three to Antonio Reeves, Kentucky star player who's in the running for SEC Player of the Year. Bucket, three, timeout, Rupp goes crazy. Couple plays later, hits a three. Couple plays after that, hits another three. Couple plays after that, hits another three. In total, in his first 5 minutes in college basketball, this kid, and by the way, I think everybody listening to this segment probably watched the game or at least highlights. Torres didn't even do justification on how cool this was, as in his first 5 minutes of college basketball, 11 points on 3 of 3 3-point shooting. Oh, by the way, he added a couple blocks into the mix as well, as he just had a debut for the ages for the Kentucky Wildcats. And so when you look at the debut, Kentucky goes ahead and wins. Again, the score is not reflective of how dominant Kentucky was in this game. But I just bring it up to say this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And now here is the question. Kentucky, who I said on Friday's show, well, I said Wednesday. Remember Wednesday? I said I believe there are 3 teams that are cut above everybody else in college basketball: UConn, Carolina, and Kentucky. Well, Kentucky just added a 7'2" unicorn, and I hate that term, but I think it's applicable here, to a roster that is already in the top 10 with a bunch of NBA draft picks. And so the question becomes, is Kentucky the favorite right now? I don't know. UConn's really good. Tennessee's pretty good. UNC's pretty good. Purdue's pretty good. Whatever. But I don't think there is a single team that Kentucky will play the rest of the year that they can't beat. And if you want to sit here and say you think they're the best team in college basketball because they have the highest upside in college basketball, I am not here to argue with you about it. First off, Big Z appears to be as good as advertised. And we know how all this stuff goes. A lot of times you get these hyped, recruits or international players, and it doesn't feel, they don't live up to the expectations, or they're not quite as good. And we'll see, if Big Z can continue to live up to these expectations as the season wears on. I get that it's college basketball. I get that it's easy. I get that it's not easy, excuse me. I get that it's a process. I get that as more teams get more tape on him, listen, he's going to have highs and lows like any freshman in college basketball. But for him to do what he did on Saturday after essentially not playing competitive basketball at all for 6 months, that's unbelievable. And 2, why I do think that he puts Kentucky even in another stratosphere. And I say that about a team that I said earlier this week was the second or third at worst best team in college basketball. He's both very talented, and he also brings the one thing that they need, which is size and rim protection. This is the crazy part. Kentucky was already good. Kentucky was already in the top 10. But the one thing they were really lacking was depth in the front court and rim protection. Well, this kid is 7'2". Defensively, I can't sit here and say I've seen enough of him to know if he is elite, but he's got great instincts, protects the rim, had 3 or 4 blocks in his debut, and he just brings exactly what this Kentucky team needed. If you watched the loss to Texas A&M a few days ago, they just didn't have enough big bodies. Texas A&M, too many offensive rebounds. The loss to Kansas early in the year. I don't remember the stat line, but Hunter Dickinson went for a bunch of points and a bunch of rebounds, okay? But to have this kid now, it's just another big body in a front court that desperately needed it. But beyond that, and this is the cool part, this is the part that matters, this is the part that's important. What he does is exactly what Kentucky is already doing. It's not as though he's 7'2" and he just clogs the paint. Because if you've watched this Kentucky team, a lot of really talented guards, 4 or 5 guards, I don't think it's hyperbole. If you include Justin Edwards, who's more of a wing than a guard, they have 5 guys that are either in the backcourt or on the wing that could potentially be drafted like this year. Rob Dillingham, DJ Wagner, Justin Edwards, I just mentioned, Reed Shepherd, obviously, Antonio Reeves, who's the leading scorer and probably the SEC player of the year as a 5th-year guy. Listen, I'm not a draft expert, but you listen to the Jimmy Dykeses of the world, the Jay Billises of the world. They say they think he could get drafted this year. So you add in those 5. And the last thing you want to do is add in a big center that's stiff, that's not mobile, that doesn't help them. And I guess you would say, what's the right word? That doesn't, like basically a big guy whose game doesn't match the guard's game. Okay. I'm trying to think of the word. I don't know why I can't remember it, but anyway, you get the point. And so that's not what you want. And that's not what this kid is. He's big. He's athletic. He heightens all of the things that you need without limiting anything, especially on the offensive end. He's still, he can shoot, he can post up, down low, spacing, ball movement doesn't slow down with this kid on the court. And so when I look at this team, is this the best team in college basketball? I don't know. UConn's pretty good. Tennessee's really good. Purdue's really good. But couple things. I don't think there's one with more pure basketball talent than the Kentucky Wildcats this year. And I think the other thing is, as long as they can keep all of these guys if their minds right, because obviously, look, as the season goes on, there's going to be draft stuff and this and that, but it hasn't been an issue so far. But as long as you can keep these guys' minds right, they're still going to get better. That's the crazy part. I keep going back to this. You just added a 7-foot potential first roundish type pick to this roster. Justin Edwards still has not really gotten going. And so if you can keep all of the positives, all of the positive energy, all of what they do well, which is spacing, ball movement, they're the most unselfish team, even though they're maybe the most talented team. If you can keep all of that while also getting better, also bringing along Justin Edwards, also bringing along Big Z, it's scary season for Kentucky, man. So I don't want to make too much of it, but I am here to tell you, anyone who doesn't think that this team is in the short conversation of national championship contenders, but more importantly, of all the championship contenders, I think they have the most room to grow, the most room to get better. Like, respectfully, Purdue is kind of what they are right now, right? Like, there's certain teams, I don't know, even UNC. I love UNC. I don't know how much better they can get. They got a bunch of 5th, 6th-year guys. Kentucky's got a bunch of freshmen. Some of them aren't even playing well. One of them just got eligible on Saturday. So congrats to Kentucky fans. I hope you enjoyed day 1 of the Big Z experience. I can only hope the rest of it is just as good. All right, let's quickly rip through the rest of a busy Saturday and Sunday in college hoops. And I would say, listen, I get that it was a busy NFL weekend, 4 games, Saturday and Sunday. But I will also say, if you were paying attention to college hoops, there was a lot of good college hoops. So let's get to everything outside of the Big Z hysteria that is worth diving into. First game that I do want to talk about, Kansas. They took another road loss to West Virginia. Final score 91-86. Couple thoughts here. So I have a couple thoughts here, and I think you can look at this from one of 2 ways. First off, not a good thing for Kansas, okay? This is now the second time that Kansas has lost on the road in Big 12 play in 3 league games. What's crazy is they have essentially played the 3 worst teams in the league in the process. Oklahoma State is the only winless team in Big 12 play. Kansas beat them on the road. But then UCF and this West Virginia team in the post-Bob Huggins era are both struggling. They're both towards the bottom of the standings, but they both have a win over Kansas. And so if you're a Jayhawks fan, listen, I don't know how you can't be concerned to a degree. I get that Bill Self is the god. He is unbelievable, probably the best coach in college basketball. But you are against what is the easy part of your schedule. You are struggling to win games on the road. And as I have essentially said since really November with the Champions Classic, when they beat Kentucky in a game that I think was closer than a lot of people anticipated, I am worried about this depth. They have a great core 4 of Hunter Dickinson, Kevin McCullough, KJ Adams, and DeJuan Harris, and really nothing behind them. And so if they've already lost 2 league games on the road, it's only going to get tougher when you have to go to Houston, to Kansas State, Texas Tech, whoever you deem to be those tougher teams. But again, this is the easy part of the schedule. And if you're Kansas, you have to be concerned. At the same time, though, let me also say this, because Bill Self, in my opinion, has done something very interesting over the last couple games that I think is at least worth monitoring, at least worth talking about. Take out your little pen and paper and put this in your little notepad here from January 21st as Torres talks a little bit about this. What he has done that I find very interesting. Like I said, we've talked about depth. We've talked about the fact that they have 4 guys and not very much behind them. And when I say 4 guys, I mean like 4 guys that do everything. This isn't like, well, the 5th and 6th guy are good on any. No. Nobody is contributing anything. And so what I find very interesting is this, is that over the last couple games, Kansas has decided to play a true freshman named Johnny Furphy big minutes, and he is actually slowly starting to deliver. Now, that might not mean much to you, might not mean much to whoever, to your buddies at the office cooler, the water cooler in the office. But what that says to me is that Bill Self is desperately trying to manufacture depth because he knows he doesn't have it. What do I mean by that? Well, Johnny Furphy is a kid from Australia that many believe is a future NBA player. Early on, first year in college, adjusting to life in college, can't quite figure it out. He hasn't been great early. And what Bill Self did this week was he just threw him into the starting lineup and said, my guy, you're playing like 28 to 31 minutes. I don't care whether you're ready or not. Now, again, that might not mean much here on January 20th or 21st, but what that essentially says to me is this. Bill Self is basically creating depth where it doesn't exist. And I'm not saying that you ever want to lose a game, but in my opinion, what Bill Self is saying with this decision is pretty straightforward. My guy, I need you ready to go, and we are going to get you comfortable in big games, big scenarios, big situations right now, whether you're ready or not. Because it's not really about right now. It's about what happens in the Big 12 tournament and the NCAA tournament. Kansas, no different than Arizona, UConn, Kentucky, North Carolina, Duke, whoever. It's not about getting to the tournament. It's about what you do once you get there. And so what I believe Bill Self is essentially doing is saying, I will sacrifice a loss here in January to build this kid's confidence, to get this kid comfortable playing Big 12 basketball with the hope and belief that by the time we do get to March, he is going to be ready to go. So just keep an eye on that. From the Kansas perspective, they do fall to 3-2 in league play. I think the only silver lining, if you're a Kansas fan, nobody right now in the Big 12 is great, and nobody is running away with this league. Now, by the way, this is something that I talked about a few weeks ago, is that I don't think there's very much separation pretty much anywhere in college hoops, but I bring it up because if you're a Kansas fan, right now, Texas Tech and Kansas State are alone at 4-1 atop the Big 12 standings. And then right behind them is a bunch of teams that are 3-2 and 2-3. Houston already has 2 losses in this league. Oklahoma, which is ranked, has 2 losses. Baylor has 2 losses, picked up their second loss to Texas. And so all that says to me, there are no great teams in this league. Kansas will have time to make it up. Now, it's up to them to actually do it. But to me, I wouldn't be concerned just yet. But what Bill Self has done over the last couple games You never want to lose, but if you have to, get the young guys experience, build their confidence. That's what I believe they are doing. Let's get to a couple other games. How about the Tennessee Vols? Listen, I know that anytime Torres says anything nice about Tennessee, I always get the same response. Torres, Rick Barnes, March, he can't do it. I don't really care. Show me what he does in March. Okay, I get it. I get that if Rick Barnes and Tennessee, which has never made a Final Four, doesn't break through, or until they do break through, nobody is going to believe in them. That's fine. That's your prerogative. It is worth noting they have made the second weekend of the tournament 2 of the last 4 seasons, 2 of the last 4 NCAA tournaments anyway, something a lot of programs cannot say. UConn cannot say that. Kentucky cannot say that, etc. But at the same time, if that's your opinion, that's perfectly fine. I also bring it up to say, they destroyed a very good Alabama team on Saturday at home. And the crazy part is their star transfer, Dalton Knecht, didn't even play great. He certainly didn't play bad. That's not what I'm saying. He finished with 25 points. But this was a guy that was basically dropping 35 a game the last 3 or 4 games before this, finishes 8 of 25 from the field. And Tennessee still puts up 91 points and ends up winning. And so why I bring it up, it feels very obvious to me, and you're welcome to disagree. I'm just watching the games and observing, and if you disagree, that's your prerogative. But what this says to me, this Tennessee team is different. Tennessee is not only a great defensive team that has to beat you, they have to beat you. In previous years, they had to beat you 68, 65. If you got to 70, they weren't winning. This team is different, and these are the types of teams that I always look for in March. In March, it's about 2 things. It's about 3 things, in my opinion. You have to have NBA players. NBA players win in March. Dudes win in March. Guard play, always important. But also, maybe the most important thing, in my opinion, can you win more than one style? Can you win if the game is 97-92, but can you also win if it's 62-60? That's why I think Virginia has largely struggled through the years. The one year that their offense was very efficient and they could score a lot if they needed to, they won the national championship. But most years, if a team can get to 73 on them, they can't keep up. Well, Tennessee in years past, they could not. They only played one way. Had to be a rock fight, had to be ugly. They beat you up, whatever. That ain't this Tennessee team. This Tennessee team, to me, probably has as much upside as any team of the Rick Barnes era. Maybe that 2019 team with Grant Williams and Admiral Schofield was about as high as the ceiling has been. But I think this Tennessee team is that. I feel like they're different. I do feel like them, Kentucky, and Auburn. By the way, if you haven't been paying attention to Auburn, they're destroying everybody right now. Auburn's actually the only undefeated team in SEC play right now after they just beat Ole Miss by 23 points on Saturday night. This Auburn team is very good, but those 3 to me are the best. Auburn's schedule, by the way, gets a little bit tougher. 3 of the next 4 are on the road: at Bama, at Mississippi State, Vandy, and at Ole Miss. They do have kind of an advantageous schedule. They only play Kentucky once. They only play Tennessee once. They do play Bama twice, obviously, but those 3 to me are a cut above everybody else in the SEC. Really quickly, 3 really good games in the Big East on Saturday, okay? So this is interesting. There are 6 teams right now that really, if the season ended today in the Big East, would be in the tournament. Seton Hall, Creighton, Marquette, St. John's, UConn, Villanova. Why do I bring it up? They all played against each other on Saturday, and we got 3 great games. The first one, how about Creighton winning in triple overtime against Seton Hall on the road? Wild thing about this game, Seton Hall is a player named Kadari Richmond, He both had a triple-double and also finished 8 of 32 from the field. And so it was crazy because he was the reason they were in the game. He was also the reason if he had just passed the ball a few more times, they probably would have won the game, probably in regulation. But Creighton wins, kind of an important win because they, of course, lost to UConn on Wednesday night. So Creighton gets the win at Seton Hall. Really fun game. Speaking of really fun games, Marquette at the Garden survives. The crazy part about this one against St. John's, Tyler Kolek, the reigning Big East Player of the Year, he was like a 92% free throw shooter coming in. He missed 3 of 4 foul shots down the stretch, which kept St. John's in it. They missed a shot at the buzzer. Listen, I know St. John's fans, now that you've got a taste of winning, you expect to win every game. But Pitino has this team primed. They're going to make the tournament. They're really good. UConn, by the way, wins by 1 at Nova. They really won by 4. Mark Armstrong hit a 3-pointer at the buzzer from basically half court. I am told from a gambling perspective that shot may have mattered to quite a few people. It did not matter in the final result. So UConn gets the win. Interesting thing about the Big East, UConn is now alone in first place in the Big East. As we hit kind of the midway point of that conference slate, UConn 17-2 overall. They will remain number 1 after this week. Two more stories really that I want to get to. One kind of funny, one pretty serious to wrap the show. So let's get to them really quick. The first one, Duke. Did you see what happened to Duke? Pitt goes into Duke and upsets the Blue Devils. I'd love to sit here and make fun of Duke, but they were without 2 of their 3 leading scorers. Jeremy Roach and Mark Mitchell were both out of this game with injuries. But I only bring it up because 1, Duke lost. 2, did you see what happened after the game? Blake Hinson from Pitt, as the game goes final, runs and jumps on the scorer's table and basically beats his chest in front of the camera crazies. It was an awesome sight. And then finally, last thing that I do want to get to, this is a little bit serious. Keep in mind who's in the car with you at this time, because we're going to hit on a little bit of a serious topic to end the show. But Terrence Shannon Jr., All-American at Illinois. He returned to Illinois on Sunday, and it was an interesting story over the course of the weekend. And this is where it gets serious, so turn down the stereo if you're listening with whoever in the car that you don't want serious topics to be brought up. But so Terrence Shannon Jr. was trending to be a first-team All-American, and I think like a top 15, 20 type NBA draft pick. 5th-year senior from Chicago, started his career at Texas Tech, etc. About probably right around Christmas time, a little bit after Christmas, he was charged with sexual assault stemming from a situation at the University of Kansas. He went to the Illinois-Kansas football game in the fall, and charges were brought against him. Obviously, it goes without saying that he was suspended. Well, on Friday, he got a temporary restraining order from a judge, essentially against the school. So he was basically suing his school that allowed him to come back. I'm not going to get into the legal elements of it, but essentially what he argued was that his livelihood is at stake by not playing right now. Basically between NIL deals, between future earnings in the NBA, he is being hurt. And I guess the judge, based on the information that he or she has right now, decided that the restraining order was legitimate. And so they allowed Terrence Shannon Jr. back with the team. And on Sunday, he made his return to the team, played about 28 minutes, finished with 16 points. Now, listen, a couple things here. One, I'm not going to get into the legalese. I'm not going to victim blame or victim shame or whatever. The point that I'm trying to make is pretty straightforward. Obviously, look, in my job, in my role in the media, I've heard some things, nothing I'm comfortable enough coming to this show to discuss with you. But what I would also say is 2 things stand out to me about this. Well, 3 things. One, the charges are very serious, and they are charges. There's a difference between an accusation and a charge. There's a difference between a charge and a conviction. But charges are serious. Charges are a big deal. What I would also add to that, though, is the judge with the information did not have to file a temporary restraining order. The fact that he or she did leads me to believe that they believe that this case will eventually either be settled or dismissed or whatever. But they also realize, wait a second, now the way the legal process works, this thing could drag on for weeks and months and years, and this kid could really be at stake. Finally, what I would say is Illinois doesn't have to play him. And the fact that they are playing him, I know what everyone will say, they just want to win. No. The AD wants to keep his job, and the coach wants to keep his job. And so because of it, as much as they all would love to just play a guy because he's really good, I don't think they would play him if they truly believed that he was a criminal and he was guilty of everything he was accused of. If you want to be mad at me for delivering that message, that's fine. I am just telling you my personal opinion. But listen, AD knows if you play a kid that eventually ends up behind bars, your career is over. Same with Brad Underwood, the head coach. And so I just bring it up because to me, this feels like something, it's going to be a story until the charges are either dropped, it's settled, whatever. But I also believe that both the school and the judge probably feel like they have enough information to let this kid play. And I will say, if he's back in the lineup, this is a team that is good enough to win the national championship. And it'll obviously be a story everywhere they go as long as he's playing. All right, I think that's it for this episode of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. Do think it is time for me to get out of here. What a show today. Covered a lot of ground. Busy show, but man, oh man, that was a fun show. If you're not subscribed to the show, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure to subscribe. Also, make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead, give us a quick 5 stars. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, all that good stuff. Make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. That is all for today's show. Appreciate your support. I am going to get out of here. Shout out to Torrin Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Reddick, you F-head. Unblock me, bruh. I'll be back on Wednesday. New episode, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast.